I'm Gladys Falkenhan. My husband, Mark Falkenhan, died in the line of duty on January 19, 2011 in an apartment fire in Hillendale, Baltimore County. Mark was a firefighter with over 25 years experience in the Baltimore County Volunteer Fire Department and the Career Fire Department. Mark left the Career Fire Department after 17 years of service and took a position with the United States Secret Service as an emergency medical service instructor. Mark trained all the time. He was always reading, he was always teaching. He was the type of instructor that if there was one student who just wasn't getting something, he would meet that student and just go over what that firefighter needed. He believed that training was the most important part of firefighting. On the night of January 19th, Mark was officer in Squad 303. He was actually at the firehouse taking a class that night. As far as I knew, Mark was in class. I had no idea that he had actually taken a call, and I had no idea that it was a 4-alarm apartment fire. One of Mark's very close friends came to our house that evening and explained to me that there was a very bad fire in Hillendale and that Mark was there. I had no idea that he was going to tell me that Mark was the one that was in trouble. What he told me was that Mark was called a mayday and that he was on a 3rd floor balcony. And of course, as every firefighter spouse, you think, he'll be fine. Things will work out. You know, I remember almost thinking, this really isn't happening. You know, it never doesn't happen to us. It happens in the movies. After arriving at the hospital and being made aware of how serious the situation was, reality struck. And at that moment, it was almost as living in the movie where this type of thing happens, not in our life, not to us, to other people. The next days were very hazy. They're much of a blur. After reality actually set in, after the funeral and people returned to their lives, we didn't have our normal life to return to. And I started to think about what Mark would be saying, what Mark would want if there was a different outcome or if it wasn't Mark. And I decided then that as much as Mark loved firefighting and being an instructor, he would want the most important thing be that we learned from what happened to him. It's very important to move forward so that we can prevent this from happening again, because unfortunately it will happen again.
Today I am here to introduce you to critical information that will change the way we view our approach to ventilation, strategies, and tactics in both occupied and unoccupied structure fires. In a few moments, I will introduce Mr. Adam St. John, a former Montgomery County Fire Protection Engineer and a volunteer firefighter with the Wheaton Rescue Squad. He presently is employed with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Fire Protection Section in Beltsville, Maryland. In addition to making a career out of understanding fire behavior, he is one of us. Someone who has worn SCBA into burning buildings, someone who has operated at fires without the protection of a charged hose line, someone who has pressed forward to conduct a primary search. He knows us well, better than you might think. Adam has graciously agreed to present an engineering analysis and after-action review of a tragic line-of-duty death that occurred in Baltimore County, Maryland in 2011. That loss of one of our own emphasizes the need to change the way we think about ventilation and the relationship between ventilation and fire behavior. I warn you now, some of the conclusions will be controversial and emotional for those of you who want to remain anchored in tradition. It will challenge many of the principles that you were taught and trust about firefighting. It will also expose shortcomings of our own SOPs designed to effectively defeat fire while minimizing the risks to our personnel and to the public we are sworn to protect. My expectation is that we will always risk a lot to save a savable life. It is also my expectation that we fully embrace a safety culture that will get the job done without incurring injuries or deaths. As part of that culture, I expect each of you to apply what we teach by eliminating unnecessary risk-taking just because we have always done it, or our desire to be aggressive obstructs common sense that screams at us to change our behaviors. Recent investments by the MCFRS in risk assessment, saving our own, and execution of the basics provide the appropriate foundation to receive this cutting-edge information. Just like other major changes in the history of firefighting, I suspect there will be resistance. Elimination of three-quarter boots, mandated use of Nomex hoods and ear flaps, the elimination of riding on the rear step, standing in open cabs, wearing seat belts, mandating respiratory protection during overhaul, and many others presented pushback. Ultimately, we are all better for those changes. The body of knowledge and our own experiences continues to grow. Consider this after-action review an introduction to ventilation flow paths as the first installment of many lessons in your near-term future. As we provide additional training opportunities, you will be immersed in example after example of the effects of wind-driven fires, fuel-controlled and ventilation-controlled fire behaviors, the additional risks of lightweight building materials, the inherent limitations of our personal protective equipment envelope, false assumptions that can occur when using thermal imaging cameras, and other practical examples that will likely require changes to our current SOPs. This is necessary to guarantee your health, safety, and welfare while performing a job that by design is inherently dangerous. I am confident, as I have always been, that our workforce will embrace these changes when presented with the facts and evidence that supports the need for change. I also believe that a certain amount of discourse in any organization is healthy. The senior staff here at MCFRS is always open to professional dialogue as the issues surrounding safe structural firefighting emerge. Finally, I would like to dedicate our efforts to understand this tragedy to Mark Falkenhand, who gave his life in the performance of his duties. His sacrifice and the willingness of his fellow firefighters and family in Baltimore County to share this information will help the profession completely understand the events that resulted in Mark's untimely death. Through that understanding, we will all be better equipped to prevent future line of duty deaths. It is now my honor to present one of our own, Mr. Adam St. John, and his analysis of the fire at number 30 Dowling Circle. Pay close attention. The life he saves may be yours.
My name is Adam St. John, and I'm a fire protection engineer with the ATF Fire Research Laboratory. As both Chief Lohr and Gladys Falkenhand mentioned in the introduction, this is going to be a three-part video series, and the first video today, is going to be on the Baltimore County line of duty death incident of firefighter Mark Falkenhand from 30 Dowling Circle. In two different instances, flow paths made the difference between being able to put this fire out and having essentially a line of duty death in the end. This is a slide of the ATF Fire Research Laboratory, and it's a laboratory just like NIST or UL, and we have it, we're basically there to answer questions for our agents, and this was an ATF case to begin with. I went to the University of Maryland to get my education as an engineer. I worked on the private side for RJA, and I worked here in Montgomery County as a fire protection engineer for about 3 years while I was still in school. As soon as I graduated, I got hired by ATF and I got my licensure as a professional engineer. I've also been in the fire service here in Montgomery County for almost 12 years. So for this DVD series, like I said, it's going to be split up into 3 different videos. This first video is going to be all about this line of duty death incident. Now when we talk about ventilation flow paths as engineers, it's a scientific term but it's something that you guys see as firefighters every single day. We're starting to learn about these line of duty deaths and these ventilation flow paths and how they're connected, but they've been occurring since fires existed. We're just learning about the science behind them, when and how they form, why they're killing us so quickly as firefighters, and also some tactical considerations. How to identify them, what we can do about them, and even how we can use these flow paths to our advantage for suppression activities. So the second part of the video series is going to be tying these flow paths to a number of other line of duty death incidents. We know now that the Cherry Road fire in DC, those 2 firefighters died the same way Mark did. They were in a unidirectional flow path. We know the 2 firefighters that died in San Francisco in 2011, they died the same way Mark did, in a unidirectional flow path. We know that the firefighter who got burned in Montgomery County in Leisure World, it was a garden apartment fire, that was a unidirectional flow path. The 2 firefighters that got burned in PG in 2012, you guessed it, it's a unidirectional flow path. You guys will understand why these form, how they form, and how to identify them. That's what we're driving home. The third part in this series is going to be tactical considerations. We're going to learn about sizing up the fire. UL and NIST have done a number of studies. They joined forces with FDNY, with Chicago Fire Department to really systematically look at ventilation and suppression tactics. When do we ventilate? What is the effect of ventilation? Do the more we ventilate, does that actually cool the fire environment, or does that cause the fire to grow and increase these temperatures inside the room? We have to coordinate ventilation. We have to put water on the fire as soon as we can, and we're going to talk about that a lot in detail in the third part of this video series. We're also going to talk a little bit about our gear, our face pieces, our equipment, our coats, our jackets, and how they protect us. They protect us by absorbing energy, and we are getting burned when we're in these flow paths, and we understand why, and I'll share that information with you. So how does ATF get involved in these firefighting tactics? What is our role? Basically, ATF, it has the federal nexus for fire investigations. What does that mean? Well, it's my job as an ATF fire protection engineer to use our burn lab, which is just like NIST lab, to answer the questions of our agents. Now, in this particular case, Baltimore County, they called us on scene, and we worked this case as ATF. Now, we work with NIST and UL as part of the Society of Fire Protection Engineers Fire Service Committee. And basically, it's our goal to advance cooperation and communication with the fire department. So we talk about what we're learning about, the cases that we're learning, and we share that information with you guys in the fire service. We're all working together with our laboratories, with our research to help the fire service. So, why do we care about flow paths? What is a flow path to begin with? Essentially, these are high velocity, high temperature gas flows and relatively no visibility. You have zero visibility. So firefighters don't realize they're in a bad place, mostly because they don't see flames. And we'll go over why the flames aren't there a little bit later. So when we talk about Cherry Road, when we talk about Leisure World, when we talk about San Francisco, when we talk about Baltimore County and Prince George's County, these are all flow path issues. These flow paths are what injured and killed these firefighters. And now we're realizing fires 15, 20 years ago, where we blame them on backdrafts or flashovers, these were probably flow path related as well. So what is a flow path and how are they created and why is it important to you? That's what we're going to talk about now. So when we talk about a flow path, they occur at every single fire, and typically the flames and heated smoke move away from the fire and the fresh air moves in from the outside towards the fire. It's really that basic, I promise. It's something that you guys see every single day. So like I said, we call it, as engineers, a buoyancy-driven flow. What does that mean? It means that these flow paths are driven by the effects of heat. So this is our fire out in the open. We know fire gives off energy. It gives off heat. It heats those gases rise. So when we talk about flow paths, we said they were buoyancy-driven. What does that mean? Well, this is our typical fire, and I know this is very basic, but we're going to start basic and become slightly more advanced. So let's look first at a bidirectional flow path. This is very simple. We have a fire in the center of a room. That fire heats the gases, and we all have seen this before. Those gases rise. They become more buoyant. and they come out of the opening. We have mass flowing out, so we have cold air coming in. This is what we see on most fires when we're on the fire floor. So we have a fire in the center, that hot air comes up and out, cold air comes in. I know this is basic. This cold air coming in along the floor is going to keep you cool. Your turnout gear works by absorbing energy. That energy is dissipated when this cold air flows in around you and behind you. So this cold air coming in along the floor gives you as a firefighter decent visibility, and it also acts to keep you cool. So when you have two flows competing for one opening, it limits the amount of ventilation going to that fire. You have flows coming in one way, flows coming out the other way, and it's relatively inefficient. This means the fire size is also limited because the ventilation is somewhat limited. When the smoke layer is from floor to ceiling, which is almost every single fire we go to, the more we ventilate, the bigger the fire is going to get unless we put water on the fire. And we'll talk about ventilation a lot more in the second video. This is what we call a bidirectional flow. The same flow exists when we have two openings. So this might be the front door of the structure, and this might be the back door of the structure. What's key here is these openings are the same height. So what is happening? That hot air goes up, it fills the space up top, and it goes out one opening. And in this case, because these openings are the same height, it goes out this way. So it splits up, and you have two locations of bidirectional flow. Now, when does this all change? We have the same fire, the same opening. When this opening is at a different height, this is when we created the flow path that killed Mark Falkenhand and the firefighters in DC and the firefighters in San Francisco. So what happens? All that we do when we make an opening at a different height is we create this flow path. What happens? We had that cold air coming in, it becomes heated, it becomes buoyant from that fire, and it goes out the higher opening. Why? Because that air is less dense and migrates up high, it goes up and out. We'll see that here. Those lines represent the air that's becoming heated, and now it changes direction. Before we had two flows competing for the same opening. You have unidirectional flow, high velocity, high temperature flow. Why does the velocity, when we say velocity, we mean speed, matter? It'll travel past you at 8, 9, even 10 miles an hour. Is that faster than you can crawl? Yes. Is it faster than you can run in turnout gear? Possibly. That's not important. What's really important is the fact that your gear is going to absorb that energy very, very quickly. Why? We talked about our gear keeping us cool by absorbing that energy. When it travels past us at a high velocity, you're in that convective oven. It's moving past you, and you're basically increasing that heat transfer rate to your gear, which means it's going to increase the heat transfer rate to your skin. Now, we take that same fire, we put it in a 2-story building. What's going to happen? So when we arrive on scene and this door is shut, we force that door. Right now we have bidirectional flow. The hot air comes up and out the opening. The cold air comes in down low. The air wants to come out the second story. It's heated, but there's nowhere for it to go. So what do? We arrive on scene and we think that we're going to let all the heat out. What actually happens? Well, we create an opening up high. When we do that, we allow more air in, the fire grows, and the fire follows that flow path. It changes from bidirectional to unidirectional, all in one direction, and it's going to follow that path up to that opening you create. So if you vent, enter, search this bedroom upstairs, what are you doing? Well, almost every time the bedrooms are on the second floor, you're creating a flow path right to you. We'll talk a lot about vent, enter, search. We think it's a great tactic, but you have to isolate yourself. You have to close that door to block that flow path. Anytime you have an opening up high and an opening down low, those hot gases are going to want to migrate out the higher opening. What do these flow paths look like in real life? This is the fire that killed Mark Falkenhand. These are the conditions when they arrived on scene. We see side alpha, a 3-story garden apartment building. We see smoke coming out from floor to ceiling. unidirectional flow. They have full PPE, it's a cold day, they have a charged handline, and they cannot make the stairs. What do we see here? Well, essentially, on side Charlie, we have a lot of fire and no smoke. On side Alpha, a lot of smoke and no fire. You can hit the seat of this fire from the outside, work your way in. The fire is going to go out very fast. They flowed a lot of water down the stairs, trying to fight that flow path. It didn't do a lot of work. We'll go over why in a second. What do we see? In this incident that I'm about to share, there were actually two flow paths that really were the turning points of the incident. The first one was this one. This is side Alpha. This is the back side, side Charlie. We had a fire in the terrace level apartment. Those gases became heated. They traveled all the way through to side Alpha. They could not make the stairs. It's your typical basement fire scenario. We'll go over why in a second. Now, the flow path that actually ended up killing Mark happened here. Again, every time you see these flow paths, you need an opening up high and an opening down low. The low opening is going to be your inlet. The high opening is going to be your outlet. What do we see here? In this case, we had an opening low. The fire extended into this apartment. Mark was searching back here. Mark never had to crawl until he was involved in flashover conditions and called a mayday. This entire third story became involved just seconds after the second story. Why did conditions change so fast? How did he become trapped? It's all about a flow path. An opening low. This room went through flashover. All that energy stayed inside of the building and trapped him right here. We'll take a look at that in 1 second. So, why do these kill us? High velocity, high temperature gas flow, and zero visibility. We're used to zero visibility in fires, but conditions change and we still don't see anything. We still don't realize we're in a bad spot until it's too late, until our gear becomes saturated with that energy. The people that have survived these flow paths say it's like being stung by 1,000 bees all at once. You get up and you try to get out, and you end up dying just a few feet from where you are. You never have time to push a button, you never open your hand line, and we will go over exactly why. We've seen that in at least 2 of these incidents, the same thing happened, and we'll go over why in a second. How do you block these flow paths? This is an image from Baltimore County. Doors are the best way to block a flow path. Can a hand line do it? Not very well, and we'll go over why. If you block either the inlet or the outlet, you block the entire flow path. It's like putting your finger over a straw. If you block the inlet of air, the water's not going to throw out. If you block the water on the bottom, the water's not going to flow through. If you block either the inlet or the outlet, conditions change 100%. For this analysis, if any one of the 3 apartment entrance doors were shut, Mark never would have died. And we were able to show that over and over again. And actually, on this case, we were able to show that the crew that vent and search did a great job. They used a hollow core door to protect themselves. It bought them all the time they needed. At least 5 minutes from all the research we have done at ATF and all the research UL has done. Probably a lot more than that. So what are we going to talk about? This is the fire. It happened in January of 2011. We were called to the scene with ATF right after the incident. The building was still smoking, and we worked with the post-incident analysis team to collect the information and answer some questions. Anytime we get a case with ATF, it's our job to answer their questions. Use the resources we have, fire modeling, use our lab to actually burn 2 buildings, actually burn furniture to collect information to answer the questions. What were the questions they asked us to answer in this case? With ATF, it's my job to answer questions for the agents, and in this case, for the state and local investigators. When they arrived on scene of this fire, which by the way was food on the stove, witnessed ignition at about 6 o'clock at night. This was your typical fire. It extended to the kitchen. They could not make the stairs. Why were the temperatures so high that with 2 charged hand lines and full PPE, they couldn't make the 6 feet down the stairs? It was a ventilation flow path. We'll look at that. The second question was, the fire started on the terrace level. 15, 20 minutes later into the incident, basically after this initial fire was put out, we have Mark burning to death, caught in flashover conditions on the 3rd story. How did the fire spread from this bottom level to the 3rd story 20 minutes later? It's a big question. The third question was, the first time the incident commander saw any sign of fire, of a second fire from side Alpha, was immediately when he sounded the evacuation tones. Mark called his mayday 10 seconds after the evacuation tones. There was no sign of this fire from side Alpha until they saw flames in the stairwell. About 10 seconds after, the second floor flashed over. The entire third story was on fire. We had the second floor on fire. We had the third story on fire. How did the fire travel so quickly from one story to the next? It was a unidirectional flow path. We will show you that. And not to play Monday morning quarterback, but how do we prevent this from happening again? What are some of the lessons learned, some of the turning points in this incident? I created a computer model of this fire. It was in a program called Fire Dynamics Simulator. We used actual information from burning actual buildings to create this model. Now, we had, in this case, very, very good witness statements. We interviewed a lot of firefighters that were on the scene, literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of witness statements. What do we look at? Well, we knew how this fire spread to the building because one firefighter said he saw a fire this big at this point in time, and he made this radio transmission. We know that at that point, with a hard timeline, the fire was this big. We know that they were pulling out a victim at this point in time later on, and they had flames rolling over their head. We knew that room was going to flash over at that point. We know when this window was broken out by this crew that is about to vent and research the structure. You put together literally hundreds of these events, and it tells the entire story. It's a very time-consuming process, but it has to be done in order to make this model accurate. So in this case, we had also had a lot of these, a lot of photos. We had photos from when they arrived on scene initially. We had photos of pre-mayday conditions. We have photos of the firefighter bailing out head first. Those help us a lot determine fire spread and the conditions within the building. So there are many, many data points that we had in this case, very few unknowns. We were able to tell the whole story, and the model helped us do that real time. So this video that we're going to watch is a modeling video, and the introduction to it is going to show us how the building is laid out. Now this is your typical, ordinary construction garden apartment building. We have many of them in our first two areas, and there are lots of them like them all over the country. There's one central stairwell, which is accessed off a side Alpha, which we see here. If you go down the stairs, you go down a half a flight, about 5 or 6 feet, to the terrace level. And then you up a half a flight to the middle floor, which is what we're calling the second floor of the building. And then above that, another full flight is the third story. So inside Charlie of the building, we have balconies. The only place for ventilation or access inside Charlie are the rear sliding doors. The doors open up onto a wooden balcony. The fire starts in this unit, in the terrace level unit on the actual, on the stove. This is side Bravo, this is side Charlie. And what this doesn't show on the model, because the fire never spread from the fire building to another building, is that there's no access from side Alpha to Charlie. So they couldn't pull a hand line around back. Essentially, there's an alley on side Charlie they eventually get some apparatus to and attack the fire from side Charlie. So we're going to do a flyover now. This is side Alpha. Remember, there's no access from the front side to the back. When we fly over, we'll take the roof away, and you'll see that the building is split symmetrically down the center. There's 2 apartments on each level of the building, 6 total apartments. On side Alpha, on each unit, there are 2 bedrooms. So when you vent and search or break out the windows on side Alpha, you're in the bedrooms. You go around after you enter the door to a living room area. There's also a kitchen around back. As you can see in the model now, the fire starts on the stove when the occupant was cooking and actually frying chicken. They see the fire ignite or reflected in the slider, and they call 911.
Baltimore County 911. What's the address of the emergency? 30 Dowling Circle, apartment T2 with the fire. Okay, I'm going to help. I'm going to get some information, and that was 30. Ma'am, 30 Dowling Circle?
Yes.
Okay, is that off of Deanwood Road?
Yes.
What apartment are you in?
T2.
I'm sorry, T2? Okay. What was on fire, ma'am? Ma'am, what's on fire? Ma'am? Ma'am, what's on fire? What is on fire?
The kitchen.
The kitchen? What in the kitchen is on fire? Ma'am, what inside the kitchen is on fire?
Huh?
What is on fire in your kitchen? What part of the kitchen?
Oh my God.
Is it the stove or the table or kitchen stove? Okay. All right, are you able to turn off the power and close the door? Ma'am, are you able to turn off the power and close the door?
No, it's too much fire.
It's much higher. What is your name?
Okay,
Okay, I got help coming out there, okay?
thank you.
All right, I want everybody to evacuate to a safe place. Is
Okay.
anybody injured?
I can't find my cat.
All right, I need you to get out of the apartment, okay? All right, anything does change or worsen, you call us back immediately.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that was an actual 911 call from the scene, and the caller was somewhat distracted because she couldn't find her cat. Now, when she exits the building, and even before that, she does what we do. She wants to let the smoke out. She wants to create better conditions for her to search for her cat, so she ventilates. Now, what does that do? Typically, when a fire becomes ventilation limited, the smoke layer is from floor to ceiling. So by opening that back slider, she allows that smoke to actually escape from the room. That allows a lot of fresh air to come in, so this fire doesn't become ventilation limited until the kitchen goes through the flashover stage. So by opening that rear slider, by ventilating this fire, she actually increases the fire growth. And we'll talk a lot more about that in this next lesson. And the exact same thing actually happened in the Leisure World incident in Montgomery County. We'll review that. So what's going on now? We have a fire in the kitchen. The oil begins to boil over out of the pot onto the stove. It ignites the cabinets above. Now, we used actual kitchen fire data to create this model. What happens? Relatively small rooms go through the flashover stage quicker because they have a smaller volume. When they go through flashover fast, all that energy spills out into the into the front living room. When that happens, the fire begins to extend to the items in the living room, and we have plenty of air coming in that rear slider. Eventually, that second slider also fails due to the heat from the fire. Now, in this building, and we'll talk about it more in a second, none of the door closers worked. What does that mean? It means when you open the entrance doors to the apartments, which, by the way, are fire rated, by the way, they require the door closers because they block these flow paths. We've known that for 50 years. So when she left the apartment, that door remained open. What does that do? Well, initially, it doesn't do a whole lot. Why? Well, that smoke fills the stairwell, but there's no outlet. Remember, we talked about for this unidirectional flow to exist, we have to have an opening down low and an opening high. In this case, we still only have one opening. The only opening is right here in the back. So all that heat fills the stairwell, but there's nowhere for it to go until the fire department arrives on scene. Let's watch that happen. So the smoke is beginning to fill the stairwell. This upper slice of the model we see here, we cut the building in half. This is the terrace level, the second story, and the third story. This is where smoke and fire is. This is where the heat is. The first two engine company approaches from the south. Here's a Google Map video or image of the actual incident. You can see here's the fire building. There's no access from side Alpha to side Charlie. Here's the actual alley where they end up sending some units around back who put out this fire very quickly by using that flow path to their advantage. Let's listen to the on-scene report now.
Engine 11 arrived. We got a 3-story brick, guard department. We got smoke showing. Captain Miller off engine 11B command had the next engine in, grab the hydrants right at Deanwood and Dowling.
Engine 11, 1821.
All units from command at this time, we're going to be doing an aggressive interior attack with an inch and 3/4 line.
Engine 291, response check, 1821. 292, calling your route.
Yes, with 3.
297, route with 3, 1822.
Dispatch from command, I'm going limited command, we have rescue.
So they realize they have a rescue to make as soon as they arrive on scene. What happened there? Well, essentially, because the stairwell is full of smoke, the occupant in the third level unit opens the door. She sees the smoke. She closes the door to the stairwell, and she runs to her bedroom window. They throw a ladder. They take her out. A nice, quick, easy rescue. That went very well. So when does this flow path develop? You can see here that there's a lot of heat inside the actual apartment. By the time we get back here to the stairwell, we have two legs of that fire triangle. We all know the fire triangle is heat, fuel, and oxygen. Now, in this case, we have plenty of heat. We have a working fire here. We have plenty of fuel, but there's no air over here. There's no ventilation over here until we open the door. When the fire department opens that door, now we have that opening low at the rear slider and the opening high. How high? We're talking only 4 feet, 5 feet in this situation. This is not a wind-driven fire. There's no fan involved. What's driving this unidirectional flow is because we have one opening higher than the other. Any time you have this, you're going to create this flow path. This is that unidirectional flow path. So we have temperatures in excess of 600 degrees from floor to ceiling. If you get on your belly, it's not going to be any cooler. How fast is this energy traveling past you? What kind of velocities do we have? Well, we're talking about 8, 9, 10 miles an hour. You're heating up very, very quickly. Now let's talk about what the actual people saw on this incident. I'll pause the video for a second. They open their hand line. They try to flow their hand line down the stairs to battle the flow path. It doesn't do anything. Why? Well, there's no fuel in the stairwell. All of this is smoke coming from the floor below. Your hand line works by absorbing energy, but unless you absorb the actual energy from the seat of the fire, you're not going to cool temperatures at all. The hand line is only reaching to the bottom of the stairs. The seat of the fire is in the back of the unit. So they open their hand line full bore. They're not getting any cooling. Why? Because they're not hitting the fuel that's actually burning. They see bits and pieces of flame here and there. So here's a picture showing the reach of their hand line. Here's the seat of the fire. I'll play this a little bit more. What else do we see? Well, in this case, we talk about the fire triangle. Now, these flow paths are incredibly dangerous because unlike flashover conditions, there isn't a lot of flame. Do we have temperatures approaching flame temperature? Absolutely, but we don't have much flame. Why is that dangerous? It's dangerous because we don't realize we're in a bad situation. If a room is going through flashover, we see a lot of flames, we realize we're in trouble, we need to get out. When we enter a structure and we're in this flow path and there's already zero visibility, we don't realize we're in a bad spot. So the outer part of our gear, that outer layer begins to heat up and that heat begins to travel through our gear to our skin, but we don't see any flames, so we have no way of recognizing we're in trouble. Why don't we see a lot of flames? Because we run out of oxygen. We'll take a look at that in a second. What's going on in the actual scene? You can see here, this crew is trying to make the stairs. They can't. They pull a second hand line and they flow it through a window. That's a good idea. We'll flow in a little bit more water, see if we can absorb a little bit more energy and actually make those stairs. Now, the truck crew, realizing that the stairway is untenable, they decide to vent, enter, search. A great idea. They do a great job. They break out the window, they shut the door, and they create an area of refuge we'll look at in a second. So take a look at this flow path. What is going on? The air enters in the back. We see a lot of fire, a lot of flames. Why? That is where the fire triangle is. By the time this air makes it through along this flow path, we run out of air. Here's a picture of side Charlie. We see a lot of flames. We don't see any smoke. This is the inlet to the flow path. This is the best place to attack that fire. Not from side alpha. On side alpha, the front side, you see a lot of smoke and no flame. As you go along this flow path, you run out of oxygen. You consume the oxygen where that flame exists, and then by the time you get to the front, there's no air left. What does that mean? It means when you're in that flow path, you don't see a lot of flames. Are you pushing 800, 900 degrees? You absolutely are. It's what Dan Majorkowski from NIST calls black fire. You run out of air, but you still have those heat conditions. You still have the fuel. You just don't have air. So you're in a very bad spot. You're approaching actual flame temperatures in excess of 1,000 degrees, but you don't recognize you're in that condition. The people who were advancing the hand line saw bits and pieces of flames, but that's it. Why? Not because it wasn't hot, because there wasn't any air. And we see that time and time again. What's going on inside Alpha? Here is an image from the actual scene of the truck crew. What are they doing? They decide to vent and search because the actual stairway is untenable. When they do that, the first thing we need to teach people, and the acronym was created, VEIS, vent, enter, isolate. Isolate, 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 and search. The first thing we want to do is make sure that floor is there, and then also shut that door. What does that do in this case? When they break out the window, they come around, and they actually shut the door. They do a search of the room that allows the smoke to leave that window they just broke out, and it also blocks that flow path to them. We'll go over what they did next in a second. At the actual scene, on Side Charlie, command sends a unit to Side Charlie. They pull a hand line. They put out this fire in just a few seconds. Why? They're applying water directly to the seat of the fire. A little bit of water in the right spot makes a huge difference. From the ground level, they pull a hand line. They don't even have to mask up. They do a quick sweep of the balconies. The fire extended to the balconies. And from the ground, they put water on it. What they don't realize is the fire does not go out completely. There's a small fire that they couldn't see from ground level that continues to burn on the top of the balconies. The majority of the fire was in the apartment unit. That was their priority. They do a quick sweep of the balconies, and they go in, and they put out the bulk of the fire in just a few seconds. Meanwhile, this case, Mark Falkenhand, who was the firefighting victim in this case, arrives on scene. What does he see? When he arrives on scene about this time, the fire was essentially out. Mark never had to crawl until he essentially burned to death in flashed over conditions. Why? Well, essentially when he arrived on scene, they just saw a little bit of smoke. The fire was knocked in that terrace level. His partner who survived said it didn't seem that smoky when we first went in. They were going to do a quick search of the whole building, grab some coffee, and go home. So what went wrong? It was almost 2 separate fires in this case. Mark and his partner go to search the second floor apartment. Now the initial fire was quickly knocked from Side Charlie. They used that flow path to their advantage. They attacked the fire from the inlet, and the fire went out. Now they're doing overhaul there. Mark does a quick search. They have their hand lights in their hands, and they're just bent over, duck walking underneath the smoke. Quick, easy searches. Let's talk about the door closers in this case. What we said before. In the actual units, they used to have wooden tiles. They wanted to modernize the units, so they put carpet on top of the wood tiles. They didn't remove them. It was cheaper. When they did that, the carpet impacted the door sweep on the bottom. These were spring-loaded door closers that are required by code. Why? They block these flow paths from existing. This isn't anything new. We've known this for over 50 years. Did the occupants complain about this? No, and made it more convenient for them when they're carrying groceries in. So every single door had to actively be shut behind them to actually close and shut that door. They didn't close automatically in every single unit. So, meanwhile, the initial fire is pretty much out. Command is calling for utilities. Command is calling for investigators. The incident is certainly de-escalating. There's a small fire that continues to burn on top of the balconies. How do we know this? The truck crew that vent enter searched saw it on the balcony. The engine crews who were operating on the terrace level apartment where the fire first started could see all the way through the building. The fire was essentially out. They could see the lights on the engine on side Alpha. So meanwhile, the truck crew, they vent enter searched the front apartment. When they did that, they shut the door, they searched that front bedroom, then they decided to actually go and search the rest of the apartment. They opened the door, assessed conditions, and they went to search the living room. They also shut the door behind them. What did that do? That allowed them an area of refuge to go back to if they needed to escape. They end up finding a victim on that second level, and they pull the victim back to that bedroom that they entered in. They opened that door, perfectly clear conditions. They shut the door behind them. The room where they come from, the living room on that second floor, ends up going through flashover, but now they have an area of refuge in that bedroom. They have all the time it takes to get an unconscious person out that window, which can take a while. The flames never extend into that room because they shut that door. We'll look at pictures of that in a second. What's going on within the apartment? That small fire that continued to burn on top of the balconies extended to some plastic curtains that were hanging here. The slider already failed. Those curtains fall to the ground and ignite the love seat. We know this because the truck crew saw it happen in that unit. When they see it start to extend, they find a victim. Their priority is getting the victim out of the unit. It was a small fire, one they said they could have knocked with a water can. Their priority was getting that victim out. It was a viable victim. They ended up surviving. So meanwhile, we have a second fire almost in this unit. This fire has ventilation because the rear slider is vented, and it begins to grow along this couch. Now, there is a myth that fire doubles in size every minute. It doesn't. It basically follows what we call an exponential growth timeline, meaning it spreads relatively slowly, it releases a little bit more energy, and then it spreads faster, and then faster and faster and faster. 2 squared is 4, 4 squared is 16, from there. So it starts growing very, very fast, almost through that flashover stage. So right now, the fire is relatively small. It's just on that love seat. It's so small, nobody says anything, and Mark up top doesn't realize, as they're doing their search, that this fire exists. Nobody ever tells him about this fire until essentially he's caught in the flashover conditions after the evacuation tones are sounded. What's going on? So Mark is searching this room up top on the 3rd level, and then he decides to go to this other room right above this fire. A second truck crew comes in the stairs and opens the door to the apartment that's on fire on the 2nd level. What does this do? It creates the beginning of that flow path. We have an opening down low at the rear slider, and now we have an opening to that hallway. That creates a flow path to the unit. Those doors had to actively be pushed shut behind them in order to close. So meanwhile, Mark is up above. Remember, when Mark arrived on scene, he saw very light smoke conditions, absolutely no fire at all. When they're doing their search, they're yelling back and forth. They have hand lights, they're bent over and duck walking underneath the smoke. They're basically is barely an IDLH. So Mark decides, he's yelling to his partner, we're going to do a quick search. You go search the front 2 units. I'm going to go search the back 2 units. So Mark goes to the back living room. His partner goes to the front bedrooms. When they enter that unit, they leave the door open behind them. So now we have an inlet down low on the back side, which is a back slider. There are no openings on the front side, but there is an opening that's higher back on side Charlie. What does this do? This is your inlet. That energy, when the unit goes through flashover, the heat release rate, the amount of energy, the size of the fire increases very, very fast. By having an inlet down low and an outlet up high, all that energy stays inside of the building. It flows through that stairwell and ends up trapping Mark. What could command see from side Alpha? Not a whole lot. Why couldn't they see a lot? Because both the entrance where you see flames and the exit where the smoke is coming out is on side Charlie. The first time command sees fire, you're going to see a frame of it. That's the first thing they saw. They ordered everybody out. By then, it was too late. So what we're going to hear now is the audio from the actual incident. What's going on? Well, Truck 8 ends up locating the second victim from this living room area in the apartment. When they pull that victim out, they have flames rolling over their head. They call command to say, hey, command, we have a victim. Command, we see a fire. Command doesn't hear them. Meanwhile, Mark is searching up above on this 3rd level. By the time they get the victim out of the door, they have flames rolling over them. They get on top of the victim to protect them, and their gear ends up being totaled. They have flames rolling over their head. They protect them. Now, we're going through the flashover stage, and all that energy stays inside of the building and ends up trapping Mark. So now we're going to listen to Truck 8's audio. We're going to hear the evacuation tones. We're going to see a picture of what command saw. The first flames he saw, he orders evacuation tones. At that point, it's too late, and you'll hear the Mayday audio. So Truck 8 is pulling the victim out as flames are rolling over them.
Very direct somebody else on the 2nd floor.
And they call command as we hear
That's
right now.
correct.
Okay, 241.
Heavy fire in the hallway. All units evacuate the building. Urgent, all units evacuate the building.
This is the first fire that they see from side Alpha.
Authority command, all units evacuate the building. Department Firebox 11-9, all units evacuate the building, 1841.
303 emergency! 303 emergency!
Here's Mark's Mayday.
Evacuate the building. Do we have a
Squad
mayday?
303. Squad 303, location.
Attention to the 3rd floor, heavy fire!
Squad 303.
Attention all units operating on Firebox 11-9. This talk group is now restricted. Talk group now restricted. Squad 303 from dispatch.
That's on the 3rd floor, heavy fire! One of the upper level.
Heavy fire, first floor, Alpha Bravo corner.
I hear crew members. That's right. Can I make it?
So the only way Mark had to get out where he was on the backside of the building would have been the rear slider. There are flames coming up below from the fully involved apartment fire down low. There was never a hand line to the second story, so there's no way out inside Charlie. This is a picture of his partner. His partner was on side Alpha. Essentially, when his partner hears evacuation tones, he turns back to get Mark. He's yelling back and forth to Mark, and he makes it to the living room when he's met by a wall of smoke and flames. He realizes he can't exit, so he runs back over to the window. When he makes it to the window, he climbs on top of a desk, which is right in front of the window. He shines his hand light out the window, indicating he needs a ladder. This ladder was over by this window. As soon as the ladder touches, because the flames are coming up behind him, he bails out head first. He makes it halfway down. His regulator gets stuck, and he flips off the ladder, and they end up catching him. If they were both in the back, they probably both would have died. There's no way out. If they were both in the front, they probably both would have bailed out and survived. It's just the way that it was in this case. Mark continues to call several more maydays. However, his face piece fails. That was the first thing that went in his PPE, and we're able to show that basically the first thing that failed was the weakest link was his respiratory protection and his ability to see, his face piece. And we'll talk about that more in the third part of this series. So search crews enter the building after command ordered everybody out. They start flowing water in from many different sides, and they end up locating Mark on side Charlie, just inside of that rear balcony door. The actual rescue and extrication of Mark was somewhat difficult. There was a ladder company on side Charlie of the building, which we'll see an image of here. The ladder was fully extended, however, it came up short. So they had relatively poor visibility. They had to package Mark, who's a relatively big guy, in a Stokes basket, and bridge that gap between the balcony and that ladder. So after we analyzed the incident with the computer model, the post-incident analysis team from Baltimore County asked me to answer several questions. And the first thing was, not to second guess what Mark did or any of the firefighters on the scene, what impact those doors being stuck open, the door closures not functioning, had on the final outcome of this incident. So the good thing about modeling is we can easily change a few variables and run the same thing again. And that's exactly what we did. So what we're looking at now is what we call an alternative run of the model. So we shut one single door. In this case, we shut the door to the third level of the unit. So in this case, we only have one door shut, and the fire never makes it to the apartment where Mark is trapped. You can see in the upper left is the actual fire scenario, and on the right is when that door is shut. The fire never makes it through that door. Why? It is a fire-rated door, but it doesn't have to be. We're blocking the flow path, the outlet for that flow path, and we have ventilation-limited conditions. The fire can't survive up here because there's no air up here. If that one door was shut, it would have been a completely different outcome. We did a second analysis where we shut the second level door. When we do that, we can see here in this slide that the actual fire scenario is on the left side. On the right, the fire never makes it out of that unit. Why? Because that door prevents the actual outlet of that flow path. It creates ventilation-limited conditions up against the door, and that's exactly what it's designed to do. If the unit catches fire, the fire stays contained in that unit. It's what we call compartmentation. The fire-rated doors work really well, but hollow core doors also work extremely well. And we'll look at a case of that in just 1 second. We also did a third analysis where we kept the original apartment entrance door shut on the bottom level. In that case, the fire stayed inside of that unit. In that case, the initial entrance crew, the initial entry crew, could actually make the stairs, go to the bottom of those stairs, pop that door, and attack the fire directly without battling that flow path. So if any of those doors actually operated, it would have a completely different incident. Let's forget the science and look just at the pictures from the actual case. This is one picture from the terrace level. You look in on the left side apartment T1, that door was closed throughout the incident. There was never an IDLH inside of that unit. On the right side, this is where the fire started. That door was open. All the flames, heat, and smoke from that unit went into the stairwell. You can see in the stairwell we had incredibly high heat conditions, what we call clean burning to the drywall. There is no fuel in the stairwell. All that fuel comes from other units. In apartment A1 on the left side, that door was closed other than when they entered it to search. They shut it behind them. Never was an IDLH in that unit. Apartment A2, that door was open for the majority of the incident. That's where the fire extended into the unit. We look at the third level actual hallway. You can see, again, high thermal damage, even though there's no fuel. All the fuel is coming from the unit below that's on fire. You can flow as much water as you want in that hallway. You're not going to cool anything. That hallway is not burning. Now, apartment B1, the door was open. Again, apartment B2, that door was open. Mark was found in apartment B2. Now, we talked about fire-rated doors. Now we're going to look at hollow core doors in this incident. We talked about the actual crew vent and searching, and when they did that, they did a great job. So what we see here is an image of the two front bedrooms. Both of these doors were shut. Behind us is the living room. The living room went through flashover and then was fully involved for a good period of time. The fire never makes it through that hollow core door. These are the conditions on the other side of the hollow core door. The window they vent and searched was behind us. By closing that door, they have all the time they need to get the victim out of this window. It buys them plenty of time. The fire never extends into this unit because you block that flow path. By closing that door, it's not a fireproof door, but you create ventilation limited conditions on the other side, so the fire doesn't exist there very long. Buys you at least 5 minutes in the tests that we've done, and in many cases longer than that. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. Here's a picture, a photo from the actual scene. The hollow core doors are in the upper left of this case. You can see high temperatures, lots of flames existed in here, but they never made it back into that hallway because both of those doors were shut and created ventilation limited conditions in that hallway. Shutting that hollow core door bought them at least 5 minutes in that case. So what were the ultimate conclusions of the model? What did the team ask me to look at? Here are the following 3 conclusions of the analysis. The first one is the ventilation flow path up the stairs prevented that first 2 engine company from making it to that bottom level apartment. This flow path was not created from a fan. It was not created by wind. It was that 5-foot difference, an opening down low and an opening up high, and making it down those stairs very, very difficult. High temperature, high velocity flow. It's going to happen every time. There's always a better place to attack that fire. Use that flow path to your advantage. Attack it from the inlet. The second conclusion was because we had another flow path with an opening low in the rear slider and an outlet at the upper slider in the 3rd floor, all of that energy stayed inside of the building and it trapped Mark, and it caused that 3rd floor to go through flashover just a few seconds after that 2nd floor. Again, it's a flow path issue. We need to block that flow path and use that flow path to our advantage. The third and final conclusion showed that if any one of the 3 doors were shut, the incident would have had a completely different outcome. Blocking that flow path makes a big difference, and the easiest way to do that is with a door. So we talked about, in Mark's case, why these flow paths are so dangerous. They're high temperature, high velocity flow, and you don't see them. There's hardly any visibility because you run out of oxygen. You have flame temperatures, you're in a place where you shouldn't be, but you don't see flames and you don't realize it because of our turnout gear. And we'll talk more about gear in the 3rd part of this series. Now, we're going to go over in detail in the next video each one of these incidents, but it's going to become a broken record. We look back at Cherry Road and we realize that this incident, which occurred 14 years ago, was almost identical. It's a flow path issue. We had 2 firefighters killed at the top of the stairs, and they were caught in a unidirectional flow path. We had firefighter Phillips and firefighter Matthews at the top of those stairs. They had an opening down low, where we see on side Charlie lots of flames and no smoke, and an opening high on side Alpha, a lot of flames a lot of smoke and no flames. Why? Here's your inlet, here's your outlet. The firefighters were stuck in between. They couldn't tell, they couldn't see any flames because there wasn't any oxygen. We look now too in San Francisco, the same thing. A double line of duty death. The firefighters were caught in a unidirectional flow path at the top of the stairs above a working basement fire. In both of these cases, DC and Cherry Road, we had full PPE, a charged hand line, experienced, aggressive firefighters who were in place, ended up dying a few feet from where they got in trouble. They got caught on that flow path. You don't realize it until it's too late. You don't open the hand line. You don't hit an orange button because you don't realize you're in a bad spot. If you make an attempt to exit, you're following that flow path the whole way out. You're in those high temperatures. We're going to go over this. It's a broken record at this point, like I said. Here's one that just came out. Prince George's County. 2 firefighters severely burned. Guess where they were? They were caught in a unidirectional flow path above the working basement fire. They made an opening up high, which was the outlet. There was an opening down low. So we're going to go over how to recognize these flow paths and some tactical considerations. What can you do to stop them? How do you know when they exist? What do they look like? We will show you actual flow paths and describe these in detail. The purpose of the first video was to apply these flow paths to a situation that we've been in a lot within this county and that we see a lot within the fire service. In Mark's case, we did both of these flow paths, and it's something we can apply to real life, and Gladys wanted us to share it with you. I want to thank Gladys Falkenhand for taking the time to come in and introduce this section, and it really shows and puts a face with these incidents. Also, Steve Laura for taking the time to create the video and document this so we can get it all out to you guys. Thank you again.